There's a quiet kind of power that most people never get to experience, not because it's rare, but because we've been taught to misunderstand it entirely. We live in a world that equates strength with noise, with dominance, with always having the last word. But what if the real secret to unshakable influence and inner resilience isn't about speaking louder or pushing harder? What if it's hidden in the opposite, in the art of silence, in the discipline of restraint, in the quiet mastery of self? This is where Stoicism, an ancient philosophy practiced by emperors, warriors, and thinkers, reveals its timeless brilliance. For centuries, it has taught that true power doesn't come from controlling the world around you, it comes from mastering the world within you. And the most extraordinary part, these lessons aren't locked away in history books. They're practical, actionable traits you can start applying today to transform how you navigate challenges, relationships, and even your own mind. Imagine a life where external chaos doesn't dictate your peace, where setbacks don't break you but refine you, where you move through the world with a quiet confidence that doesn't need to announce itself. That's the promise of Stoicism, and it's built on 25 foundational traits, each one a stepping stone to a life of unshakable strength and intentional silence. These aren't abstract ideas, they're tools forged in the fires of real human struggle, tested by time, and proven by everyone from Roman generals to modern leaders. Traits like unflappable composure in the face of criticism, the ability to listen deeply instead of rushing to react, or the discipline to withhold words when silence speaks louder. These are the hidden levers of influence, the kind that don't just change how others perceive you, but how you perceive yourself. This video is your gateway to that transformation. We're not just exploring philosophy, here we're uncovering a blueprint for living with a power that doesn't diminish others but elevates you. Picture the difference between a storm and the deep ocean. One is loud and fleeting, the other is vast, unshaken, and inexhaustible. That's the shift these 25 traits can create in you. Whether you're facing pressure at work, turbulence in relationships, or the noise of your own doubts, what you're about to discover will give you the clarity to act with purpose instead of react from impulse. So let's begin, not with grand declarations, but with the first quiet step toward a different kind of strength, one that starts within. The first trait, unshakable composure, isn't about suppressing emotions or pretending nothing affects you. It's the practiced art of meeting chaos with clarity, like a mountain standing firm while storms rage around it. Picture Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor who ruled Rome during wars, plagues, and political betrayals. While others panicked, he wrote in his journal, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That's the essence of composure, recognizing that your reaction, not the event itself, determines whether something breaks you or builds you. Most people think composure is something you're born with, but it's actually a skill honed in small, daily moments. It starts with mindfulness, not the vague idea of meditation, but the deliberate habit of pausing before reacting. When someone cuts you off in traffic, when a project falls apart at work, even when your own thoughts spiral, that's your training ground. The Stoics called this prosoph, the discipline of attention. It's catching yourself mid-reaction and asking, is my response serving me, or is it just reflex? Here's how to cultivate it. First, reframe challenges as drills, not disasters. The ancient Stoics practiced premeditatio malorum, imagining worst-case scenarios not to fear them, but to disarm their power. A modern version, mentally rehearse pressure-filled situations, a difficult conversation, a looming deadline, and visualize yourself staying grounded. Second, embrace the pause. When tension rises, your body reacts before your mind does. Train yourself to take 3 deliberate breaths, creating space between stimulus and response. That gap is where composure lives, and remember, composure isn't indifference. It's choosing where to direct your energy. Marcus Aurelius wept for lost loved ones and felt the weight of leadership deeply. But he refused to let those emotions hijack his decisions. That's the nuance most miss. True strength isn't stone-faced rigidity. It's feeling fully, yet acting intentionally. Like a tree bending in the wind but never uprooted, unshakable composure lets you move with life's storms without being broken by them. The second trait, disciplined speech, cuts against everything modern culture celebrates. We're drowning in a world of hot takes, oversharing, and compulsive reactions, where silence is mistaken for weakness and restraint feels like surrender. But the Stoics, especially Epictetus, saw speech differently, not as a right to be exercised constantly, but as a responsibility to be wielded with precision. He warned, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." That's not just etiquette, it's strategy. Every unnecessary word is energy spent, influence diluted, and peace potentially disrupted. Disciplined speech starts with recognizing how often we talk just to fill space or soothe our own discomfort. Gossip, complaining, knee-jerk opinions, these aren't harmless habits. They're leaks in your mental and emotional reserves. Epictetus put it bluntly: if you wish to improve, be content to appear clueless or stupid in extraneous matters. In other words, your value isn't measured by how much you contribute to every conversation, but by whether your words actually serve a purpose. Here's how to practice it. First, adopt the 3-second rule. Before responding in any conversation, especially heated ones, pause for 3 deliberate breaths. Ask yourself, is this true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? That filter alone will eliminate 90% of regrettable speech. Second, audit your conversations for a week. Notice how often you speak out of obligation rather than intention. You'll start seeing patterns. Maybe you interrupt to assert expertise or default to negativity when stressed. Awareness is the first step to rewiring the habit. But disciplined speech isn't just about cutting words, it's about elevating their impact. When the Roman general Scipio Africanus was insulted publicly, he didn't retaliate or justify himself. He simply said, "I would be ashamed to govern a city if I couldn't endure an insult." That single line carried more weight than an hour of arguments. That's the power of economy. When you speak rarely, people lean in. When you react never, you disarm pettiness entirely. The modern trap is believing that visibility equals value, that if you're not constantly commenting, you'll fade into irrelevance. But the opposite is true. Silence isn't emptiness, it's the space where respect grows. Think of the people you admire most. Chances are, they're not the ones dominating every discussion, but those who choose their moments with care. Your words should carry weight, not just noise. That's the discipline Epictetus championed. Not muting yourself, but mastering the art of letting silence do the heavy lifting. Emotional resilience isn't about dodging pain or pretending hardship doesn't sting. It's about developing the capacity to move through storms without letting them rewrite your core. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher who faced exile, chronic illness, and the madness of Emperor Nero, wrote extensively about this. His letters to friends grieving losses or battling rage read like 2,000-year-old therapy sessions. "Fire tests gold," he said, "suffering tests strong men." But here's what most miss. Seneca wasn't preaching Stoicism in the lowercase sense, that stiff upper lip denial of feeling. He was mapping a radical middle path between suppression and surrender. Modern psychology echoes this. Studies on post-traumatic growth show what Seneca knew instinctively. Adversity doesn't just damage you, it can rebuild you stronger, but only if processed with intention. The key lies in what psychologists call cognitive reappraisal, the deliberate reframing of events, and Seneca's version, negative visualization, is its ancient counterpart. Picture this exercise for a few minutes each morning. Vividly imagine losing what you cherish, your job, your health, a loved one. This sounds morbid until you realize its purpose isn't to invite fear, but to dissolve its grip. By mentally rehearsing loss, you accomplish 2 things. You reduce the shock if hardship strikes, and you awaken gratitude for what exists now. But resilience isn't just mental rehearsal, it's also about constructing emotional floodgates. When Seneca's friend Lucilius raged against betrayal, Seneca didn't tell him to stop feeling. Instead, he prescribed a pause, wait before punishing. Anger will cease if it finds no outlet. Neuroscience confirms this. The amygdala's firestorm lasts just 90 seconds unless we feed it with narrative. That's why Seneca urged journaling. Writing slows the spin cycle of emotion long enough for reason to catch up. Try it next time anger or grief hits. Don't vent raw, that amplifies it. Write as if advising a friend, creating just enough distance to see the event separate from your identity. The modern twist. Resilience isn't a solo endeavor. Seneca's letters reveal a truth we often forget. Even Stoics leaned on community. After his exile, he didn't isolate. He wrote endlessly to friends, not to complain but to process aloud. Today, we mistake vulnerability for weakness, yet research shows that shared vulnerability, not heroic isolation, is the crucible of resilience. Think of it like this. A single candle flickers in wind, but cluster them together and the flame steadies. That's the heart of emotional resilience, not becoming invincible but becoming antifragile. Not avoiding the fall, but learning the art of rising in a way that leaves you wiser than before. Practical resilience starts small. Next time minor irritations strike a missed train, a rude comment, practice Seneca's two-view technique. First, see the event as it feels raw. Then ask, how might I view this a year from now? Most storms shrink when viewed through the lens of time. Second, adopt the resilience ledger. At day's end, note not just what went wrong, but how you responded better today than last month. Progress, not perfection, is the goal. Because resilience isn't a trait you're born with, it's a muscle you build, one conscious choice at a time. And unlike brute strength, this kind of power grows not from what life spares you, but from what you transform within it. Silence is often misunderstood as passivity, but in Stoic philosophy, it's a razor-sharp tool, one mastered by Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, who famously said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we may listen more and speak less." This wasn't just a quip about manners, it was a strategic insight. While most people scrambled to be heard, the Stoics realized that real influence begins not with the words you utter, but with the attention you offer. Ancient texts recount how Zeno would sit for hours in crowded Athenian markets, not to debate or lecture, but to absorb observing human nature, tracing patterns in arguments, and refining his philosophy through quiet study of others. That's the hidden power of listening. It transforms every conversation into a classroom where the other person, often unknowingly, teaches you. Modern research validates this. Studies show that active listeners are perceived as more competent and trustworthy, even when they say little. But the Stoics took it further. They saw listening as a discipline, a way to disarm conflicts and extract wisdom from even the most frustrating interactions. Epictetus, a former slave turned philosopher, trained his students to approach heated debates with a simple question: what part of this person's perspective holds a grain of truth? That shift from rebutting to mining for insight turns adversaries into teachers. Imagine applying this at work. Instead of rehearsing your counterpoints while a colleague speaks, you pause to ask, "Help me understand how you reach that conclusion." Suddenly, tension becomes collaboration. Practical listening isn't just about patience, it's about framework. Here's how the Stoics would train it today. First, adopt the 3 breaths rule. When someone speaks, let their words land fully before responding. Use those 3 breaths to silently summarize their core point, not your rebuttal. Second, practice echoing the unspoken. Reflect not just what people say, but the emotion behind it. A phrase like, "It sounds like this deadline is stressing you because X matters deeply," can diffuse frustration faster than any solution. Third, borrow Zeno's marketplace habit. Occasionally, listen to conversations not to join them but to study them. Notice how often people talk past each other and how rarely they truly hear. That awareness alone will sharpen your own listening, but the deepest lesson comes from Seneca's letters, where he describes listening as an act of courage. When you refuse to react to provocation, he wrote, you don't just spare yourself anger, you reveal the other person's chaos to themselves. Picture a colleague venting unfairly. Most retaliate or shrink. The Stoic alternative: listen calmly, then ask, what outcome would make this better? By refusing to mirror their emotion, you create a space where they must confront their own disorder. That's the paradox. Sometimes the strongest response is no response at all, just the weight of silence, forcing clarity to surface. In a world addicted to hot takes and instant reactions, disciplined listening becomes a superpower. It's how you uncover hidden agendas in negotiations, deepen personal bonds without oversharing, and most crucially, train yourself to respond rather than react. The Stoics didn't advocate silence to suppress their voice, but to amplify its impact, because when you speak less, your words carry more. When you listen more, you gain more. And in that exchange lies a quiet authority no amount of talking can match. Controlled reactions separate those who are ruled by circumstance from those who rise above it. Marcus Aurelius left us a window into this practice through his personal journals, not grand philosophical treatises, but raw, private reminders to himself. One entry reads, when you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I meet today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. At first glance, this sounds cynical, but read deeper. He wasn't condemning others, he was immunizing himself against surprise. By anticipating friction, he created mental space to choose his response rather than default to reflex. Modern neuroscience confirms the wisdom here. When triggered, the amygdala hijacks the prefrontal cortex, our reasoning center, for 6 to 8 seconds. That's the biological blind spot where regrettable words are spoken, emails fired off, and bridges burned. The Stoic antidote: insert a deliberate pause. Picture two versions of the same workplace scenario. A colleague publicly dismisses your idea in a meeting. The impulsive reaction, interrupting to defend yourself, voice rising, body tense, what psychologists call leakage, where emotion spills into behavior. The Stoic response: a slow inhale, observing the criticism like a scientist examining data, then responding, I appreciate the perspective, help me understand your concerns. That pivot doesn't just de-escalate, it reveals whether the criticism was substantive or merely territorial. Relationships expose this even more starkly. Seneca described anger as brief insanity, and anyone who said something cruel in an argument knows the truth of that. But here's where Stoicism diverges from modern advice like express your feelings. Aurelius would argue that unleashing unfiltered emotion often worsens the wound. Instead, he practiced the view from above, mentally zooming out to see the conflict as a tiny blip in life's vast timeline. Try this next time tensions flare. Picture how the disagreement will feel in a week, a month, a year. Most shrink to irrelevance, exposing how often we react not to the event itself, but to its imagined escalation. The practical framework is simple but demanding. First, create reaction rituals, physical cues that interrupt autopilot. Aurelius wore a signet ring engraved with enough to remind himself when to stop engaging. Modern equivalents could be a watch alarm vibrating hourly as a mindfulness checkpoint, or placing a small stone in your pocket to touch when tempted to react. Second, adopt linguistic buffers, phrases that insert space between stimulus and response. Let me think about that works wonders compared to reflexive agreement or opposition. Third, practice negative visualization for minor irritations. Mentally rehearse your child spilling milk or a neighbor's loud music. Then visualize yourself responding with amused detachment rather than frustration. But the ultimate test comes when reactions are justified. When Aurelius discovered his trusted general was plotting against him, he didn't erupt. He summoned the man privately and simply said, "The gods have given you life. I won't take it," then exiled him without spectacle. That's the nuance most miss. Controlled reactions aren't about being passive. They're about making responses surgical rather than scattered. In our terms, sending a formal complaint email after drafting it in notes for 24 hours carries more weight than a public outburst. Canceling plans with toxic people calmly but permanently proves strength more than heated arguments. A quiet truth is this: every uncontrolled reaction trains others how to treat you. Each time you snap at petty comments, you teach people that small things can move you. Each time you respond to provocation with eerie calm, you broadcast that your peace isn't negotiable. Aurelius didn't write his meditations to impress posterity. He wrote them to return to himself when the world tried to pull him elsewhere. That's the invitation here, not to become emotionless, but to make your reactions conscious choices rather than conditioned reflexes. Because in the end, the person you're really training isn't the difficult boss or the opinionated relative, it's you. The sixth trait, acceptance of the unchangeable, is where Stoicism shifts from philosophy to practical alchemy, transforming helplessness into agency. Imagine standing in a thunderstorm cursing the rain. No matter how loudly you protest, the clouds won't dry up to spare your suit. But here's the pivot: while you can't stop the storm, you can choose to open an umbrella or step indoors. That's the dichotomy of control in action, a concept Epictetus framed with brutal clarity. Some things are within our power while others are not. The rain falls in the first category, your preparedness belongs to the second. Most suffering stems from exhausting ourselves trying to change the unchangeable while neglecting the power we actually hold. Modern life bombards us with illusions of control. We rage at traffic as if honking could melt the gridlock, obsess over others' opinions as if approval were a switch we could flip, or torment ourselves over past mistakes as if regret could rewrite history. The Stoics called this the folly of fighting gravity, a futile expenditure of energy that leaves us exhausted and resentful. But acceptance isn't surrender, it's strategic reallocation. When a close friend lost her job during a company merger, she spent weeks agonizing over the unfairness until she stumbled on Marcus Aurelius's reminder: the obstacle becomes the way. She shifted her focus from lobbying HR for reinstatement, the unchangeable, to redesigning her portfolio and networking in new industries, the controllable. Within months, she landed a role that aligned better with her values. That's the dichotomy at work, not passive resignation, but fierce focus on where your agency actually lies. Health crises reveal this even more starkly. When the philosopher-physician Galen faced a plague in ancient Rome, he didn't waste energy demanding the disease vanish. He focused on hygiene protocols, patient care, and his own mental steadiness, areas he could influence. Fast forward to a modern parallel. Someone diagnosed with a chronic condition might obsess over why me. Unchangeable, or channel energy into adapting their lifestyle and mindset, controllable. The latter path doesn't erase the pain, but it prevents the condition from colonizing their entire identity. The practice begins with a simple but profound mental sorting exercise. Divide a page into 2 columns, what I control and what I don't. List everything burdening you: a tyrannical boss, a strained friendship, societal injustices. Then move each item to its true column. You'll find most stressors migrate to the second list, revealing how much energy you've misdirected. The magic happens in the first column, often smaller but brimming with leverage. Maybe you can't control layoffs, but you can upskill. Can't force a partner to change, but you can set boundaries. Can't undo a betrayal, but you can choose whether it hardens or refines you. Here's the twist: acceptance isn't a one-time act, but a daily realignment. Epictetus trained his students to prefix every complaint with "this is what nature wills," not to endorse injustice, but to anchor them in reality. Try it next time you're stuck in line or delayed by a flight cancellation. Whisper it to yourself, "This is what is." Feel the difference between that and the exhausting mental loop of "this shouldn't be happening." The event remains the same, your suffering diminishes, but the deepest freedom comes when we stop demanding life conform to our preferences. Seneca wrote letters from exile describing the local water as gritty and the bread as coarse. Then, in a stunning pivot, he added, "But once the soul adjusts, none of it disturbs. That adjustment, the recalibration of expectation, is the essence of acceptance." It's why Viktor Frankl, enduring Auschwitz, could write, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude." The Stoics would nod in recognition. The rain still falls, the storm still rages, but you found the umbrella not in denial, but in the quiet, unshakable knowledge of where your power truly lies. Strategic silence is the invisible weapon wielded by those who understand power's subtler currents. Picture the battlefield of Carrhae in 53b. See where the Parthian general Shauna faced the overconfident Roman legions of Crassus. As the Romans advanced, shouting war cries and clanging shields, the Parthians did something unexpected. They stood utterly still. No taunts, no challenges, just a wall of silent soldiers holding their ground. That quiet defiance unnerved the Romans more than any battle cry could. By the day's end, the silent Parthians annihilated their louder opponents. This wasn't just military tactics, it was psychological warfare, demonstrating what the Stoics later formalized. Silence isn't emptiness, its presence multiplied. The Stoics elevated this concept beyond warfare into daily life. Seneca observed that speech is the mirror of the mind, but silence is its sculptor. When you withhold words, you force others to project their own fears, assumptions, or insecurities onto that void. Think of a high-stakes salary negotiation. The moment after stating your terms, the room falls quiet. Most people rush to fill that gap with concessions or justifications, but the Stoic approach, let the silence linger. Watch how the other side often crumbles first, offering more just to escape the discomfort. The Roman statesman Cato the Younger mastered this. During Senate debates, he'd sit motionless while rivals shouted. His quiet restraint made their outbursts seem childish, shifting power without a single word. Modern neuroscience explains why this works. When confronted with silence, the human brain interprets it as a threat detection signal, triggering the same unease as an unexpected pause in a predator's movement. Skilled negotiators exploit this. FBI hostage negotiator Chris Voss trains agents to use tactical empathy, listening deeply, then deploying silence to let the other party reveal their true position. A Stoic would recognize this instantly. Epictetus taught that nature gave us one tongue but two ears, not just to listen but to weaponize the pause between sounds. But strategic silence isn't about manipulation, it's about discernment. Consider the courtroom strategy of the legendary lawyer Clarence Darrow. Facing aggressive cross-examinations, he'd often respond to accusations with deliberate silence, then ask calmly, "Is there more?" That quiet defiance forced witnesses to over-explain, often unraveling their own credibility. The Stoic parallel, Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." When met with hostility, sometimes the most powerful rebuttal is to say nothing, letting the other person's words hang in the air until their own weight collapses them. Practical application starts with 3 scenarios. First, in negotiations, after stating your position, physically press your tongue to the roof of your mouth for 5 seconds. This creates a natural pause where most would backtrack. Second, during conflicts, practice the Stoic count. When provoked, mentally count to 10 before responding. You'll notice most provocations don't deserve a reply at all. Third, in leadership, adopt the quarter-second rule, waiting that tiny but critical beat after someone finishes speaking before you respond. That fractional silence signals assurance, not hesitation. The deepest mastery comes when silence transitions from tactic to temperament. Zeno of Citium, after losing his entire fortune in a shipwreck, didn't rant about injustice. He sat quietly in Athens streets, absorbing philosophy until he founded Stoicism itself. His silence wasn't passive, it was the soil from which a new worldview grew. That's the ultimate lesson. When you stop feeding every situation with words, you create space for the only voice that truly matters, the one that speaks from wisdom, not just impulse. In a world addicted to noise, becoming selectively silent isn't just strategic, it's revolutionary. True strength wears humility like an invisible cloak. It doesn't need to announce itself because its presence is felt without spectacle. Consider Cato the Younger, the Stoic statesman who walked Rome's streets in simple attire despite his immense influence, who dined on the same coarse bread as the poor while his rivals gorged on extravagance. When Pompey and Caesar competed for public adoration, Cato deliberately undercut his own image, once arriving late to a Senate session still disheveled from a nap, not out of laziness but to reject the theater of status. His contemporaries mocked him for it, yet history remembers him as the man even his enemies respected. That's the paradox of Stoic humility. By refusing to perform greatness, you become unshakably great. Modern culture has inverted this. Social media rewards the loudest, not the wisest, where every minor achievement gets choreographed into a highlight reel, and self-promotion masquerades as confidence. The Stoics would diagnose this as a fundamental misunderstanding of power. Seneca warned, "The more we pour our worth outward for display, the less we keep within." Neuroscience backs this. Studies show people who frequently boast about accomplishments trigger subconscious resistance in others, while those who downplay their successes earn deeper trust. Humility isn't self-erasure, it's strategic restraint. Imagine two leaders, one constantly posting LinkedIn platitudes about their hustle, the other quietly mentoring colleagues without fanfare. Over time, who commands genuine loyalty? Practicing humility begins with dismantling the need for external validation. Start with a journal exercise the Stoics called the smallness meditation. Each evening, write 3 ways today's events humbled you. Maybe your brilliant idea was corrected by a junior teammate. Perhaps you failed at a task you'd assured others was easy. These aren't exercises in shame, they're recalibrations. Like a tree shedding dead bark, humility removes the brittle layers of ego that hinder growth. Another prompt: what would my rivals say about me? Not to fuel insecurity, but to expose blind spots. Marcus Aurelius filled his journals with reminders like, "You're just a grain of sand in the universe's vastness." That cosmic perspective shrinks petty pride to irrelevance. Try modernizing this by listing 3 global crises happening right now beside your personal worries. Suddenly, that argument over who gets credit for a project feels microscopic. But here's the twist: humility isn't passive. Cato didn't shrink from confronting corruption because he feared conflict. He did it because principles mattered more than praise. Real humility fuels action when others stay silent. A CEO who takes the blame for a team's failure while privately coaching them to improve wields far more authority than one who scapegoats subordinates. That's the balance: strength without swagger, confidence without crowing. Close each journal session with this question: if no one ever praised me again, would my actions remain the same? The answer reveals whether you're building character or crafting an image, because in the end, the quiet confidence of humility doesn't just command respect, it redefines what power looks like. And in a world drowning in noise, that's the rarest kind of influence. Epictetus once framed life as a play where we're all actors handed roles we didn't choose. Some get applause, others get boos, but the script isn't ours to rewrite. His point: if someone tells you that you're a donkey, he quipped, don't seek their denial, just refuse to carry their opinion like baggage. That's the essence of detachment, recognizing praise and criticism as reactions to their expectations, not verdicts on your worth. Modern psychology confirms this. Studies show that people's evaluations of others reveal more about their own biases than the target's actual traits. A boss might call you lazy because they equate busyness with value, while a friend calls you work-obsessed because they prioritize leisure. Neither label defines you, they're just mirrors reflecting separate priorities. Practicing detachment starts with rerouting feedback through 3 filters. First, ask, is this about my behavior or their narrative? When a client dismisses your proposal as unoriginal, probe whether they genuinely sought innovation or were simply justifying a pre-existing choice. Second, assess, does this help me grow or just shrink me? A mentor's detailed critique on your presentation skills is actionable. A stranger's "you're boring" tweet is just noise. Third, and most crucially, would I value this person's judgment if they praised me? If their approval wouldn't uplift you, their disapproval can't diminish you. The Stoic exercise of the double ledger sharpens this skill. Keep 2 mental columns. In one, note the factual core of feedback. They said my report lacked data on X. In the other, record the emotional wrapper. They rolled their eyes while saying it. Train yourself to extract the first while discarding the second, like salvaging a diamond from mud. When Marcus Aurelius faced senators mocking his frugality, he didn't defend his habits. He mined their comments for valid concerns about fiscal responsibility, then ignored the sarcasm. But detachment isn't indifference, it's discernment. Imagine 2 artists, one obsessively refreshing reviews, the other sending work to trusted critics before release. The first is enslaved to random opinions, the second chooses whose perspectives refine their craft. That's the Stoic distinction. You don't reject all feedback, you reclaim the power to select your judges. The ultimate test comes when praise arrives. Seneca warned that applause is more dangerous than blame because it addicts us to external validation. He advised visualizing applause as the clatter of dishes in a tavern, pleasant but meaningless. Modern parallels, that viral post with thousands of likes feels validating until you realize most scrolled past without thought. The antidote, pair every compliment with a private reality check. When praised for a successful project, ask yourself, did I truly exceed my standards or just meet someone else's? Detachment culminates in what Epictetus called the inner citadel, a mental fortress where your self-assessment reigns supreme. Build yours with daily questions. What did I do today aligned with my values? Where did I compromise? Not what did others think, but what do I know to be true? Because in the end, life's audience will always be fickle. Some days they'll cheer, others they'll throw tomatoes, but the show goes on with or without their permission. Purposeful solitude isn't about escaping the world. It's about rediscovering yourself within it. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher who shaped Nero's early reign, routinely withdrew from Rome's chaos to his country estates, not to avoid responsibility but to sharpen it. In one of his letters, he described these retreats with striking clarity. When I withdraw to my solitude, it's not to hide from life, it's to stop living through the eyes of others. That's the distinction modern culture misses. We mistake solitude for loneliness and constant connection for vitality, while the Stoics saw it backward. Noise distracts, but silence reconstructs. Consider how Seneca structured his solitude. It wasn't aimless isolation. He divided his time into 3 deliberate acts: reflection, reading, and writing. At dawn, he'd review his previous day's actions like a physician diagnosing symptoms. Midday, he'd engage with the writings of Epicurus, his philosophical rival, not to agree but to test his own convictions. By evening, he'd pen letters to friends like Lucilius, distilling his insights into practical wisdom. This wasn't monastic withdrawal, it was cognitive reloading. Modern research validates this. Studies on restorative environments show that controlled solitude boosts executive function, creativity, and emotional regulation. The key lies in intentionality. Solitude only nourishes when it's purposeful, not passive. but how do you carve out Stoic solitude in a world that never logs off? Start small. Seneca didn't vanish for months. He took micro-retreats, sometimes just hours long. Try the commuter cloister. Turn your daily commute into a silent audit of your thoughts. No podcasts or playlists. Or practice doorway detachment. Before entering your home after work, pause for 30 seconds to shed the day's mental clutter like a coat. These aren't grand gestures. They're frictionless ways to insert solitude into existing routines. The deeper layer, design a solitude ritual tailored to your needs. If mornings are your clearest hours, emulate Seneca's dawn reflections with a 3-question prompt. What did I do well yesterday? Where did I compromise my values? What will I rectify today? If evenings work better, borrow Roman general Scipio Africanus' habit of nightly self-examination under the stars, modernized as 15 minutes of unfiltered journaling before bed. The format matters less than the function, creating a space where you converse with yourself, undistracted by external narratives. The most transformative aspect of Stoic solitude, though, isn't what you add, it's what you subtract. Seneca often wrote about leaving behind his public self during retreats, the masks we wear to please employers, friends, even strangers online. In solitude, he confronted a raw question: who am I when no one is watching? That's the litmus test true solitude provides. Try it yourself. Spend an hour with no devices, no entertainment, no agenda, just you and your thoughts. The discomfort that arises reveals how much we rely on external noise to avoid inner silence. Yet solitude's greatest gift is perspective. Seneca described his retreats as stepping onto a mountaintop to see the smoke and confusion of the city below. That aerial view is what most lack. We're too immersed in daily skirmishes to recognize the broader battle. Modern life amplifies this. Algorithms feed us endless microdramas, each demanding reaction. Solitude breaks that cycle. When a CEO client faced a reputation crisis, I advised her to disconnect for 48 hours before responding, not to stall, but to view the storm from Seneca's mountaintop. She returned realizing the outrage wasn't about her actions, but about a competitor stoking controversy. Her eventual response, measured, unconcerned with winning petty battles, disarmed the narrative entirely. That's the power of purposeful solitude. It turns reaction into strategy. But here's the critical nuance Stoics understood: solitude must reconnect as much as it disconnects. Seneca didn't isolate permanently. He returned to Rome with renewed clarity to counsel Nero, negotiate treaties, and mentor others. Likewise, your solitude should serve your engagement. After a retreat, ask, how will this quiet reshape my noise? Maybe you'll stop attending trivial meetings or start expressing unpopular but necessary truths. Perhaps you'll delete apps that fragment your attention, or finally set boundaries with energy-draining relatives. Purposeful solitude isn't an escape, it's a realignment, ensuring that when you rejoin the world, you do so as your truest, most undistracted self. Because in the end, the silence you cultivate becomes the space where your most authentic voice grows. Not the one shaped by likes or expectations or fear, but the one that speaks with the quiet authority of someone who knows who they are when no one is watching. And that kind of clarity doesn't just change how you think in solitude, it changes how you act in the world. There's a moment in ancient Rome that captures the essence of uncomplaining endurance so viscerally, it still burns bright through the centuries. A young noble named Gaius Mucius, later called Scaevola the Left-Handed, volunteered to assassinate an Etruscan king besieging Rome. When captured, he was dragged before the enemy, thrown and threatened with torture. Without flinching, Mucius thrust his right hand into a sacrificial fire and held it there until the flesh charred. As the stunned court recoiled, he simply said, "See how little those who know true purpose care for the body." That's not recklessness, it's the ultimate demonstration of resolve, where pain becomes irrelevant compared to principle. The Stoics revered this story not as a call to self-harm, but as a metaphor for the kind of endurance that transforms obstacles into fuel. Modern life rarely demands literal hand burning, but it tests us in subtler, sustained ways: the marathon of a 2-year startup grind, the silent determination of a single parent working night shifts, or the daily discipline of rehabbing an injury. These are the battlegrounds where uncomplaining endurance separates the ephemeral from the extraordinary. Consider the software developer debugging a complex system for 72 sleepless hours. What keeps them going isn't caffeine or deadline fear. It's the same core realization Mucius had: that discomfort is temporary, but quitting reshapes your identity. Fitness coach and Stoic advocate Brian Johnson puts it bluntly: the difference between I can't and I won't is the difference between a prisoner and a king. But endurance isn't just stubborn persistence, it's strategic suffering. Mucius didn't just endure pain randomly, he weaponized it to prove a point, the Stoic version. Amor fati, love of fate. When marathon runners hit the wall at mile 20, the ones who break through aren't ignoring the pain, they're reframing it as proof they're pushing limits. A project manager facing missed deadlines might borrow this mindset. Instead of complaining about setbacks, they could document each obstacle as a future case study for their team. That slight pivot from "this hurts" to "this is data" transforms endurance from passive to purposeful. Practical endurance starts with micro-resistance. Navy SEAL train recruits to tolerate cold by starting with 2-minute cold showers, barely manageable, but repeatable daily. Similarly, if you're building stamina for a creative project, begin with uninterrupted 90-minute work blocks, phone locked away. The goal isn't to crush yourself immediately, but to stretch your tolerance incrementally. Marcus Aurelius scribbled in his wartime journals, "The cucumber is bitter. Toss it, brambles in your path, step around, that's all you need." His point: endurance isn't about glorifying hardship, it's about conserving energy for battles that matter by refusing to whine over trivial scrapes. The deepest layer, endurance, reveals your true hierarchy of values. When Mucius burned his hand, he broadcast that Rome's survival outweighed his personal safety. Modern equivalents emerge in quiet choices: the writer declining social events to finish their novel, or the nurse working double shifts to fund a child's education. These aren't just sacrifices, they're living declarations of what counts. That's why the Stoics warned against enduring for the wrong reasons, staying in a toxic job for status, or an abusive relationship out of fear. Real endurance always serves a higher yes, so next time you're grinding through a challenge, ask Mucius's silent question: what is this pain serving? If the answer aligns with your deepest convictions, the fire becomes just another tool. If not, maybe it's time to walk away, not because you're weak, but because your endurance deserves worthy battles. Because in the end, uncomplaining endurance isn't about how much you can take. It's about proving to yourself that what you're building matters more than what you're bearing. Decisive action in Stoicism isn't about recklessness, it's about the clarity to move forward once the path is clear, even when the consequences are irreversible. Picture Julius Caesar at the Rubicon River, the boundary between Gaul and Italy, knowing his next step would ignite civil war. The historians tell us he paused just long enough to say, "The die is cast," before crossing. That moment wasn't impulsive, it was the culmination of years of strategic calculation. But here's what most miss: Caesar's genius lay not in the act itself, but in his refusal to linger once his mind was made. The Stoics called this catalepsis, the grasp of certainty that cuts through hesitation like a sword through fog. Modern life bombards us with endless choices, from trivial what to eat for breakfast to life-altering whether to quit a stable job for a passion project. The paralysis comes not from lacking options, but from fearing the loss of alternatives. Psychologists call this the paradox of choice. The more paths we see, the harder it becomes to choose any. A study at Columbia University found people offered 6 types of jam were 10 times more likely to buy than those offered 30. the Stoic antidote. Deliberate limitation. Seneca advised, set a limit for deliberation, then act lest you become one of those who prepare forever but never build. Here's how to apply it. Start with the 5-minute decision framework. First, define the non-negotiables. Caesar knew crossing the Rubicon meant no turning back. Ask yourself, what outcomes are unacceptable? Eliminate options that violate those boundaries immediately. Second, set a timer. For minor decisions, what to wear, where to eat, give yourself 60 seconds. For major ones, career shifts, investments, cap deliberation at 5 minutes, long enough to weigh essentials, short enough to prevent circling. Third, use premeditatio malorum. Visualize the worst-case scenario. If you can accept it, the choice becomes simple. If you can't, you found your answer. The framework works because it mirrors Stoic physics. Just as an object in motion stays in motion, decisive action builds momentum. Take the entrepreneur who spent months debating whether to launch her product. The day she imposed a 5-minute rule, if I'm still unsure after 5 minutes of weighing pros and cons, I'll default to yes. She moved from planning to revenue within weeks. That's the hidden power of decisiveness. It doesn't guarantee success, but it annihilates the stagnation that guarantees regret. Yet decisiveness falters when conflated with stubbornness. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If anyone can refute me, I'll change my mind." True Stoic action includes the humility to pivot when new evidence emerges. Contrast this with modern hustle culture, where changing course is seen as failure. The difference: Caesar didn't just cross the Rubicon, he adapted tactics daily based on battlefield feedback. Decisiveness means committing to a direction, not blind adherence to a path. Practical application. Try the decision autopsy. After any significant choice, journal. What data did I have? What did I ignore? Was speed or accuracy more crucial here? Over time, patterns emerge. Maybe you delay decisions requiring financial risk or rush interpersonal ones. Awareness sharpens future calls. The ultimate test of decisiveness isn't in grand gestures, but in daily micro-choices. The writer who commits to writing 500 words before checking email. The parent who enforces screen time rules despite protests. These small acts train the muscle of resolution, so when the Rubicon moments come, you don't just cross, you stride. Because indecision is its own kind of suffering, the slow ache of untaken paths. The Stoics knew this truth 2,000 years ago, that clarity, not certainty, is the foundation of power. And sometimes the most profound act of courage isn't in the complexity of the choice, but in the simplicity of taking the first step. The statue of Marcus Aurelius atop his horse in Rome's Capitoline museums isn't just art. It's a 2,000-year-old masterclass in silent authority. Notice the details: his spine straight but not rigid, hands relaxed yet purposeful, gaze fixed just above the horizon. This wasn't sculptural flair, it was deliberate Stoic embodiment. Ancient texts describe how Stoic leaders trained their physical presence with the same rigor as their minds, understanding that body language isn't just communication, it's constitution. Epictetus, born into slavery, climbed to philosophical prominence partly through what he called the rhetoric of the body, the idea that posture and gaze could disarm opponents before a single word was spoken. Modern science confirms this. Harvard research on power poses shows that holding expansive postures for just 2 minutes spikes testosterone, the dominance hormone, by 20% while reducing cortisol, the stress hormone, by 15%. But the Stoics went deeper. Their approach wasn't about manufacturing confidence temporarily, it was about aligning external composure with internal resolve. When Seneca advised, "Stand as a statue stands," he wasn't promoting stiffness, he was teaching gravitational, anchoring the art of occupying space with unshakable intent. Start with the Stoic square, a 4-part posture drill practiced by Roman orators. First, plant your feet shoulder width like columns supporting a temple. This signals stability. Second, roll your shoulders back subtly, not to puff your chest aggressively, but to open the diaphragm for fuller breath. Ancient texts link this to vocal steadiness under pressure. Third, let your hands rest at your sides unless gesturing. Constant fidgeting, called hand-washing in Stoic circles, was seen as mental leakage. Fourth, and most crucially, train your gaze. Roman statues often depict leaders with eyes slightly lifted, not staring down. This projects vision rather than vigilance. Practice by focusing on a fixed point just above eye level during conversations. It conveys attentiveness without aggression. But Stoic body language had defensive dimensions too. The shield gaze was a technique to deflect intimidation. When confronted by someone invading your space, you'd look calmly at the bridge of their nose rather than meeting their eyes directly. This avoided both submission, looking down, and provocation, locking eyes. Historical accounts describe Cotto the Younger using this during Senate shouting matches. His opponents would exhaust themselves while he stood unmoved, his quiet presence amplifying their frenzy. For modern application, try the 3-second reset before high-stakes moments. Entering a negotiation, facing criticism, or making an entrance. Pause briefly to align posture, breathe into your lower ribs, and soften your peripheral vision. This isn't acting, it's accessing the physical blueprint of composure your body already knows. Notice how police mediators and hostage negotiators often mirror this stance. It's instinctual authority harnessed deliberately. The ultimate test comes when body language contradicts words. When Cicero was assassinated, his final gesture, pulling his toga over his face, wasn't fear but Stoic theater. By covering his head, he denied his killers the spectacle of his terror, turning death into a statement about dignity. Modern equivalents, a CEO keeping relaxed shoulders while announcing layoffs, or a parent kneeling to a child's level during a tantrum, not to condone but to contain. That's the hidden thread. Stoic posture isn't about dominance, it's about becoming the calm within the storm so others can't help but weather it with you. Your body is the first argument you never speak. Train it to carry your principles, and even in silence, you'll never go unheard. Diogenes of Sinope, the philosopher who lived in a barrel, embodied a truth that still unsettles modern society. Freedom grows in inverse proportion to desire. While crowds scrambled for status in ancient Athens, he'd stroll through the marketplace with a lantern in broad daylight, searching for an honest man, a walking satire of consumerism 2 millennia before Black Friday sales. His barrel wasn't just a home, it was a manifesto. When Alexander the Great, the most powerful man on earth, offered him anything he desired, Diogenes famously replied, "Step aside, you're blocking my sunlight." That moment crystallizes the 14th Stoic trait, contentment with less isn't deprivation, but liberation from the endless hunger for more. Modern research inadvertently proves Diogenes right. A Yale study tracking luxury purchases found happiness spikes lasted just 72 hours before buyers returned to baseline. Meanwhile, neurological studies show clutter and decision fatigue, byproducts of excess, actively drain cognitive resources. The Stoics diagnosed this earlier. Seneca warned that wealth is the slave of the wise, the master of the fool, while Epictetus, born into slavery, noted that freedom isn't secured by filling your pockets but by emptying your wants. Here's your 7-day Stoic minimalism challenge, designed not to punish but to reveal hidden abundance. Day 1, the uniform experiment. Wear the same outfit variation daily. Steve Jobs' black turtleneck or Einstein's duplicate suits had Stoic roots. Reducing sartorial decisions conserves mental bandwidth for meaningful choices. Day 2, digital Diogenes. Delete all non-essential apps, then observe how often your fingers reflexively tap where icons once were, a visceral map of your distractions. Day 3, the one-meal fast. Not to starve but to recalibrate. Skip breakfast and lunch, then savor dinner without devices. Hunger magnifies gratitude for what we usually inhale mindlessly. Day 4, silent commerce. Enter a store, physical or online, and leave without purchasing. Watch how marketers manipulate urgency, only 2 left, and recognize your power to walk away. Day 5, space reclamation. Fill a box with 10 items you haven't used in a year. Tape it shut if unopened in a month, donate it unexamined. The Stoics called this premeditatio omissionis, practicing loss to weaken material attachment. Day 6, the gift of missing out. Decline 1 invitation, social, professional, or digital. Note the sky doesn't fall, you've just reclaimed irreplaceable time. The final day, barrel meditation. Sit cross-legged in your emptiest room or literally in a bathtub for the daring. Journal, what did I crave most this week? What proved unnecessary? The answers often shock, like clients who realized they missed kale salads more than Netflix or quality pencils more than their 10th pair of sneakers. This isn't about perpetual austerity. It's about discovering, as Marcus Aurelius wrote, how little a man needs to be happy. When you consciously subtract, you don't find emptiness, you uncover the few things so vital their absence would truly diminish you. And those are the only things worth your precious life's currency. Diogenes didn't lack, he distilled existence to its essence. After your 7 days, you might keep 1 change permanently, not because you have to, but because you've tasted the sunlight no luxury can overshadow. Brutus didn't whisper his betrayal, he looked Caesar in the eye and struck, not just with a dagger but with the weight of conviction. History remembers the act as treachery, but the Stoics saw something else, the terrifying purity of someone willing to speak truth through action, even at the cost of friendship and legacy. Plutarch recounts how Brutus, once Caesar's closest ally, confronted him first with words warning him of overreach, of morphing from leader to dictator before resorting to steel. That moment crystallizes fearless honesty, the willingness to let principles override loyalty when silence becomes complicity. But here's the knife's edge nuance: the Stoics understood honesty without wisdom is just brutality in disguise. Modern workplaces offer tamer but equally revealing tests. Picture a manager who bluntly tells an underperforming employee, "You're lazy and dragging the team down." That's not honesty, it's cruelty masquerading as truth. Contrast it with the leader who sits the same employee down and says, "Your last 3 projects missed deadlines." Help me understand the gap between your capability and these results. Both convey the same core truth, but one demolishes while the other constructs. The Stoic distinction lies in what Seneca called intentio veritas. Honesty's arrow must be aimed not just to wound but to heal. Clinical psychology reinforces this. Studies on radical candor show that feedback only spurs growth when paired with genuine care. A Stanford experiment had surgeons review peers' techniques. The harshest critics produced defensive retreats, while those who paired critiques with specific improvement strategies saw performance spikes. That's the Stoic formula: truth plus utility equals transformation. Yet some truths scorch earth regardless of delivery. When Edward Snowden exposed mass surveillance, he didn't soften the blow with euphemisms. He dumped raw files onto journalists' laps, knowing the fallout would exile him forever. Like Brutus, he chose collision over comfort. The Stoics wouldn't universally applaud this. Epictetus taught that honesty should serve the greater good, not just personal conscience. Snowden's defenders argue he upheld democracy. His critics claim he endangered lives. The lesson: fearless honesty isn't a virtue until its consequences are weighed. Practical calibration starts with 3 filters. First, necessity. Is this truth vital or just satisfying to voice? Second, timing. Would delaying dilute harm or deepen impact? Third, stake. Who bears the cost of this honesty, you or others? A CEO announcing layoffs via midnight email fails all 3. One holding town halls explaining the why behind cuts and offering severance meets the Stoic standard. But the deepest honesty is often the one we dodge, the unflattering mirror. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be." B1, that's the pivot from theory to practice. Audit your own evasions. Do you rationalize unethical work demands as just business? Call gossip venting. The most fearless honesty isn't what you tell others, it's what you finally admit to yourself. Because in the end, truth isn't measured by volume, but by the change it ignites in systems, in relationships, and most critically, in the silent places of your own soul. Socrates faced insults not with rage, but with a smile that disarmed his attackers. When an Athenian politician called him the worst of men, Socrates simply replied, "Do you know someone better?" When a wealthy opponent sneered that philosophy was useless, he shot back, "Does your fortune make you happier or just heavier to carry?" Each response carried a lesson not in cleverness, but in the art of turning venom into wisdom. The Stoics saw this as the pinnacle of grace under fire, the ability to let insults reveal the insecurities of the hurler rather than wounds in the target. Modern insults rarely come as poetic barbs, more often as passive-aggressive emails, backhanded compliments, or social media jabs. The principle remains the same. Your reaction determines whether the insult lands or shatters at your feet. Picture two colleagues at a team meeting. One dismisses your idea with, "That's cute, did your intern come up with it?" The instinctive retort might escalate tensions, but the Stoic alternative. A calm, "I'd love to hear what specifically doesn't work for you. Maybe we can improve it together." This shifts the burden back to the insulter to either engage constructively or expose their pettiness. Role-playing sharpens this skill. Try this exercise. Have a friend lob mild insults at you while you respond with escalating levels of detachment. Round 1, deflect with humor. "Wow, you've been practicing that one, I'm flattered." Round 2, reflect with curiosity. "What makes you say that?" Round 3, disarm with agreement. "You're right, I'm not perfect, what's your point?" By the 4th round, you'll find most insults lose their sting because you've rewired your brain to process them as noise, not threats, the deeper layer. Insults often reveal more about the giver than the receiver. When Epictetus was mocked for his lame leg, he responded, "If I cared about your opinion, I'd insult your mind to even the score." That's the Stoic secret, recognizing that insults are rarely about you. They're projections of someone else's frustration, envy, or unresolved pain. A boss belittling your work might fear their own obsolescence. A relative mocking your life choices might regret their own. This doesn't excuse cruelty, but it lets you sidestep the emotional hook. Practical grace starts with 3 filters. First, source assessment. Is this person worth your emotional energy? A stranger's tweet matters less than a mentor's critique. Second, truth extraction. Even vile insults sometimes contain useful crumbs. A colleague's "you're too slow" might hint at legit process inefficiencies. Third, response tiers. Sometimes silence speaks loudest, the unblinking stare. Other times, humor diffuses, "That's the nicest terrible thing anyone said to me." Rarely, confrontation is necessary, but only when principles, not pride, are at stake. The ultimate test comes when insults hit raw nerves, your appearance, your failures, your loved ones. Here, the Stoics prescribed premeditated vulnerability. Mentally rehearse worst-case insults until they bore you. Imagine someone mocking your accent, your past mistakes, even your child's struggles. Sit with the discomfort until you realize their words can't alter facts, only how you choose to carry them. That's the hidden gift of grace under insult. It doesn't just protect your peace, it quietly exposes the smallness of those who try to disturb it. Calculated generosity in Stoicism isn't about withholding. It's about ensuring your kindness doesn't become someone else's crutch. Seneca, who personally funded scholarships for promising students, drew a razor-sharp distinction. Help others enough to lift them, not so much they lean. His letters reveal how he'd provide seed money to entrepreneurs but never cover recurring debts, or mentor young philosophers while refusing to write their speeches. This wasn't stinginess, it was respect disguised as restraint. The Stoics recognized a truth modern psychology confirms. overhelping erodes self-efficacy. A University of Amsterdam study found recipients of excessive aid reported 23% lower confidence in solving future problems independently. Practical generosity starts with the Stoic audit, a three-question filter. First, does this help them grow or just soothe me? Paying a friend's rent feels noble but may delay their budgeting skills. Second, can they reasonably do this themselves? Jumping in to fix a colleague's presentation denies them skill building. Third, am I sacrificing something essential? Burning out to cover a teammate's slack harms both parties. Try applying this to time, money, and advice. A client struggling with motivation doesn't need hourly pep talks. They need structured accountability check-ins. A relative begging for just one more loan might require a job training resource instead. The ancient model shines in Pliny the Younger's philanthropy. He didn't just donate to the poor, he funded libraries with apprenticeship programs, creating pathways rather than handouts. Modern equivalents, a manager assigning stretch projects with mentorship instead of taking over tasks. Or parents requiring teens to contribute labor before upgrading their phones. The litmus test: if your generosity leaves the recipient more capable, not just temporarily comforted, you've struck the Stoic balance. Because true giving isn't measured by what you part with, but by what the other person gains beyond the gift itself. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, didn't just preach focus, he engineered it through brutal daily drills that would make modern productivity gurus blush. Ancient texts describe how he'd sit in Athens' bustling agora, surrounded by shouting merchants and clattering carts, training himself to dissect complex arguments amid the chaos. His students called these sessions attention fortification, a mental gym where distractions weren't avoided but weaponized. The logic was simple. If you can concentrate while a fishmonger haggles over prices behind you, a quiet library becomes a fortress of focus. This wasn't about ignoring the world, it was about controlling what deserved your attention within it. Fast forward to today, where the average office worker checks emails 74 times daily and switches tasks every 3 minutes. Our modern agora isn't fish markets, it's infinite scrolls, pinging notifications, and the seductive lie of multitasking. But Zeno's principles translate perfectly. Start with a distraction inoculation technique. Instead of silencing your phone during work blocks, leave it visible but untouched. Like Zeno's marketplace exercise, this isn't torture, it's resistance training for your focus muscles. Research from the University of Chicago confirms this approach. Participants who worked near but didn't interact with their phones increased focus stamina by 31% over 2 weeks. The Stoic Focus Sprint protocol takes this further. Set a timer for 25 minutes, not the standard Pomodoro, but a deliberate homage to ancient water clocks. For that span, attack one task with singular intensity. When distractions arise, and they will, note them on paper without engaging. Zeno's version involved writing intrusive thoughts on wax tablets to revisit later. After the sprint, reward yourself with 5 minutes of strategic distraction. Check messages, browse headlines, then reset. This oscillation mirrors the Stoic rhythm of concentrated effort followed by intentional release, preventing burnout while building endurance. Tech tools can amplify these ancient methods when used stoically. App blockers become digital discipline coaches, but with a twist. Instead of permanently banning time sinks, schedule controlled exposure windows. Block social media until noon, then allow 15 minutes not as indulgence, but as a test of your ability to engage without being consumed. The philosopher Emperor Marcus Aurelius would approve. He praised habits that restrict the flow of distractions without pretending they don't exist. The ultimate test comes in transforming interruptions into focus enhancers. When a colleague interrupts your flow state, deploy the Zeno pivot. Respond with, "Let me finish this thought, then I'm fully yours." This honors both your focus and their need, unlike knee-jerk multitasking that halves your effectiveness. Historical accounts describe Zeno using similar tactics when students begged for attention mid-lecture. He'd pause just long enough to scribble their question on the board, then continue teaching until a natural break. The message was clear: urgency is often an illusion. True priorities can wait for their moment. What makes Stoic focus unique isn't rigid exclusion, but selective absorption. Like a sculptor chiseling away excess marble to reveal the form within, you're not eliminating distractions, you're carving out space for what matters. Start small. Next time you catch yourself reaching for your phone reflexively, freeze. Ask Zeno's defining question: is this intrusion worth the shattering of my attention? Because in the end, unbroken focus isn't about locking the world out. It's about choosing what you let in, one deliberate moment at a time. True confidence doesn't announce itself, it radiates. Picture the Roman general Scipio Africanus after defeating Carthage, the empire's greatest rival. While lesser commanders would have paraded through Rome demanding statues, Scipio refused triumph ceremonies and quietly retired to his farm. When pressed about his victories, he'd simply say, "I'd be ashamed to govern others if I couldn't govern myself." That's silent confidence, the kind that doesn't need applause because its proof walks ahead of it. The Stoics saw this as the ultimate antidote to insecurity, letting your work echo so loudly that your voice doesn't need to. Modern culture has twisted this into what psychologists call humble bragging, those LinkedIn posts that start with "I'm so humbled" before listing achievements, or the social media influencer, "just grateful" captions over staged success shots. The difference between this and Stoic confidence: one performs for an audience, the other answers only to its own standards. Research from Harvard Business School reveals a paradox. People who frequently broadcast accomplishments are perceived as 23% less competent than those who let others discover their merits organically. The ancient Stoics knew this instinctively. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journals, "Waste no time imagining what a good person looks like, be one. Not appear as one, be one." Cultivating silent confidence starts with what the Stoics called the internal victory ledger. At day's end, instead of posting milestones online, journal them privately. Not just closed the deal, but stayed patient when the client rescheduled twice. These micro wins build an unshakable inner scorecard. A study at the University of Zurich found participants who tracked personal growth privately for 6 weeks reported 37% higher self-worth than those sharing achievements publicly. The lesson: validation you give yourself sticks, validation from others evaporates. But silent confidence isn't about hiding your light, it's about redirecting its energy. When Zeno of Citium's students begged him to lecture publicly, he'd often send them to observe skilled craftsmen instead. "Watch how the potter focuses on shaping clay, not on who's watching," he'd say. That's the modern equivalent of letting your code's efficiency speak for itself, or your consistent client results build your reputation while competitors chase viral moments. Even in job interviews, Stoic confidence shifts from "here's why I'm amazing" to "here's how I've solved problems like yours." The ultimate test comes when others try to define you. When the Stoic philosopher Agrippinus was falsely accused of treason, he didn't waste time defending himself in letters or speeches. He kept teaching, kept living by his principles, and let the charges collapse under their own absurdity. Modern parallels: the coworker who takes credit for your idea, or the rival spreading whispers about your methods. React, and you enter their drama. Stay focused on your work, and their noise becomes background static. Here's how to practice it today. First, adopt the 3-day rule. Wait 72 hours before sharing any accomplishment. If it still feels meaningful, then share it neutrally as information, not validation seeking. Second, create a proof portfolio, a private folder of client thank you emails, solved challenges, or skills mastered. Review it when imposter syndrome strikes. Third, when praised, simply say thank you without downplaying or elaborating. Know "Oh, it was nothing, that's false modesty." No, let me tell you how hard it was, that's covert boasting. Just gratitude, then back to work, because silent confidence isn't passive. It's the quiet intensity of a blacksmith shaping metal. No need to tell everyone how hot the forge burns when the sword's edge gleams sharp enough to cut the air. Your achievements, like gravity, don't need advertising to hold weight. And in a world drowning in self-promotion, that kind of substance doesn't just stand out, it endures. Death awareness isn't about morbidity, it's about clarity. The Stoics called this Memento Mori, the practice of remembering your inevitable end, not to paralyze you, but to prioritize you. Picture Steve Jobs standing on stage in 2007, unveiling the first iPhone. What most didn't see was how death awareness shaped that moment. Years earlier, after his cancer diagnosis, he began asking a brutal question daily. If today were my last, would I want to do what I'm about to do? When the answer was no too often, he cut entire product lines, even profitable ones, to focus solely on work that felt legacy-worthy. That's Memento Mori in action, using the certainty of the end to distill the present into what truly matters. Stoic journaling turns this concept from abstract to actionable. Seneca's nightly ritual included reviewing the day with this lens. What did I do today that was worthy of my limited breaths? Not in a guilt-inducing way, but as a gentle pruning, trimming the trivial to nourish the essential. Try this modern adaptation. Keep a separate notebook labeled "If I Knew." Each Sunday, write one page answering, "What would I start, stop, or accelerate if I had a year left?" Don't act on it immediately, just observe patterns over months. A finance executive who did this discovered her answers consistently pointed to mentoring junior colleagues, something she'd postponed for less busy days. Within 6 months, she'd restructured her schedule to make it central. The magic lies in specificity. General life is short, reminders fade into background noise. The Stoics made it visceral. Marcus Aurelius visualized his hands as already decaying in the grave to underscore the urgency of acting nobly now, modern equivalents. A tech founder keeps a countdown clock set to 90 years, his estimated lifespan subtracting seconds in real time, not to induce panic, but to spotlight how much time meetings about meetings actually consume. Another client wears a wristband engraved with "This will be a memory soon," a tactile prompt to infuse mundane moments with presence. But Memento Mori isn't just about cutting, it's also about amplifying. When Jobs returned to Apple in 1997, he slashed their bloated product lineup from 300 to just 10. But those 10, like the iMac and later the iPhone, received obsessive focus because death awareness clarified their importance. Similarly, your Stoic journal should have 2 columns: subtract habits draining your finite time, and magnify people and projects deserving your best energy. The balance between them creates what the ancients called eudaimonia, not happiness as fleeting emotion, but flourishing as lasting impact, the deepest layer. Death awareness dissolves false hierarchies. Seneca wrote, "In the presence of death, we're all naked." Modern workplaces could learn from this, that intimidating CEO. They'll face the same end as the intern, the urgent crisis unlikely to matter in 5 years, let alone 5 centuries. This isn't nihilism, it's liberation. When a senior partner at a law firm adopted Stoic death journaling, she stopped obsessing over industry rankings and started taking pro bono cases that aligned with her values. Her surprising discovery, her uncompetitive shift, increased her firm's prestige as clients valued her authenticity. Practical application starts small. Set a weekly alarm labeled "Last Time." When it rings, ask, "If this were the final time I could do this mundane activity, my commute, a team meeting, even brushing my teeth, how would I experience it differently?" You'll notice immediate shifts, listening more intently, noticing details previously rushed past. the ultimate aim isn't to dwell on endings, but to let them sharpen your beginnings. Because when you stop pretending you have unlimited time, you start spending your days like currency, not frivolously, but with the precision of someone who knows exactly how much they're worth. Fabius Maximus, the Roman general who earned the nickname the Delayer, faced an enemy most leaders would have rushed to crush: Hannibal, the Carthaginian genius who had annihilated Rome's legions at Cannae. While senators clamored for immediate revenge, Fabius did something radical. He refused to engage. For years, he shadowed Hannibal's army, cutting off supply lines and picking off stragglers, but always avoiding direct battle. His troops called him a coward, politicians accused him of weakness, yet his tactical patience drained Hannibal's forces until Rome could strike decisively. This wasn't hesitation, it was strategy in its purest form, knowing that some victories can't be rushed, only outlasted. The modern equivalent isn't fought with swords, but with time and compounding interest. Warren Buffett, the closest thing investing has to a Stoic general, famously said his favorite holding period is forever. Like Fabius, he ignores the noise of quarterly earnings and market panics, focusing instead on the slow erosion of value against quality. Consider this: $1 invested in the S&P 500 in 1980 would be worth over $70 today, but only if you resisted the urge to sell during the 1987 crash, the 2000 dot-com bust, or the 2008 financial crisis. That's tactical patience in action, recognizing that real growth happens in the space between headlines, not because of them. To cultivate this, create a patience scorecard for your own goals. Start by dividing your objectives into 3 columns: skirmishes, short-term tasks; campaigns, mid-range projects; and wars, life-altering pursuits. For each, assign a Fabius rating, 1 to 5 stars, based on how well you're resisting the urge for premature action. Are you constantly tweaking your investment portfolio? 1 star, reacting to every market tremor, or have you automated contributions to ignore volatility? 5 stars, playing the long game. Do you abandon fitness routines after 2 weeks without visible results, or trust the invisible cellular adaptations building beneath the surface? The scorecard's power lies in its honesty. A startup founder might rate themselves highly for patience in product development. We spent 18 months perfecting our algorithm, but score poorly in personal sustainability. I haven't taken a vacation in 3 years. That discrepancy reveals where patience is strategic and where it's just procrastination in disguise. Fabius didn't delay indefinitely. He waited precisely until Hannibal's army was exhausted, but Rome's wasn't. Similarly, tactical patience isn't passive. It's the art of matching your endurance to the objective's true timeline. Practical application: try the 3-season test. Before abandoning any endeavor, a career path, a relationship, a creative project, ask, have I given this enough cycles to reveal its pattern? Nature doesn't judge a seed in winter or a sapling in drought. Why do we expect personal growth to follow a straighter line? The Stoics called this sympatheia, the interconnectedness of all things, where timing matters as much as action. The ultimate test of tactical patience comes when everyone else is losing theirs. In 2016, psychologist Angela Duckworth studied West Point cadets and found that those who performed best weren't the strongest or smartest, but those who could endure boredom without seeking distraction. That's the Fabius mindset, the ability to watch rivals exhaust themselves chasing quick wins while you conserve energy for the battles that define decades, not days. Because the cruel truth is this: most great undertakings don't fail because they're impossible. They fail because we surrender too soon to the illusion that speed equals progress. Fabius knew better, so does the investor who ignores the ticker to watch the trend. And so can you when your patience becomes not just a virtue but a weapon. Seneca called anger brief insanity, but he didn't just suppress it, he refined it, turning raw fury into focused force. Picture a blacksmith forging a sword. The same fire that could burn down a workshop becomes the tool that shapes steel. That's emotional alchemy, the Stoic art of transforming destructive emotions into constructive action. Modern athletes embody this instinctively. When tennis legend Serena Williams faced biased line calls early in her career, she didn't just fume. She used the injustice as kinetic energy, hitting harder serves, sharper volleys. "They're not going to call this one out," she'd mutter before unleashing aces that left crowds breathless. That's Seneca's method in motion, anger as fuel, not wildfire. The process starts with interception. Seneca advised his students to catch anger mid-swell, not when it's boiling, but at the first flicker of heat. Imagine a hockey player tripped illegally. The instant surge of rage is biological, but the next move is philosophical. Does he swing his stick at the offender, costing his team a penalty? Or does he channel that adrenaline into a breakaway goal, turning the opponent's cheap shot into his own highlight reel? Neuroscience confirms this pivot is possible. Studies show that labeling an emotion, "I'm feeling anger because X happened," reduces amygdala activity by 40%, creating space to redirect the energy. Practical alchemy requires ritualized redirection. Seneca's disciples practiced pre-rehearsed responses, physical or mental triggers to convert emotion into action. A Roman general might grip his sword hilt when insulted, not to draw blood but to anchor himself before issuing a strategic order, modern equivalents. A programmer furious over a bug might snap a rubber band on their wrist, then channel that frustration into writing elegant code. A writer receiving a harsh critique could clench their fists once, take 3 breaths, and attack revisions with newfound clarity. The key is creating a bridge between feeling and action, a deliberate pause where you choose the transformation. But the highest level of alchemy isn't just personal, it's societal. Seneca wrote letters advocating for prison reform after his own wrongful exile, using his bitterness to fuel systemic change. Today, Greta Thunberg's climate activism began as silent rage at adult inaction, which she forged into global mobilization. The Stoic distinction lies here. Ordinary anger shouts, "This is wrong." Alchemized anger asks, "How can I make it right?" and gets to work. Your turn. Next time frustration flares, try Seneca's fireproofing exercise. Write down the trigger in one column, "My coworker took credit for my idea." Then in a second column, list 3 ways to convert that energy into something productive. Document contributions better. Schedule a mentorship talk about integrity. Build a portfolio that makes my work undeniable. The heat doesn't disappear. It gets redirected to warm your resolve rather than burn your bridges, because emotional alchemy isn't about feeling less. It's about transforming what you feel into something that serves, not scorches. Epictetus stood alone in the Roman Senate, the weight of his next words heavier than the marble columns surrounding him. Emperor Nero had just demanded the execution of a political rival, one guilty only of writing satirical poems mocking the ruler's vanity. As other senators scrambled to voice their support, Epictetus remained silent. Then, when called to vote, he didn't merely abstain, he stood and walked out. That single act of defiance, captured by the historian Tacitus, wasn't reckless rebellion. It was the ultimate demonstration of principle over popularity, choosing inner integrity even when the cost could be everything. Modern workplaces may not brandish literal daggers, but the dynamics are hauntingly similar. Consider the tech whistleblower pressured to ignore safety flaws because fixing them would delay a lucrative product launch. Or the junior banker told to inflate numbers to satisfy investors. These aren't dramatic moral crossroads, they're daily tests disguised as routine compromises. Epictetus' story teaches us that ethical erosion rarely happens in one catastrophic landslide. It's the slow drip of just this once, and everyone else is doing it, that hollows out conviction. What makes principle over popularity uniquely Stoic is its strategic dimension. This wasn't about virtue signaling or martyrdom, it was about calculated resistance. Thrasea didn't grandstand with fiery speeches that would have gotten him instantly executed. He used what activists today call the minimum effective dose of dissent, the smallest visible action that maintains integrity without needlessly provoking destruction. In his case, it was absence removing his vote rather than lending it to evil. Modern equivalents: the accountant who quietly documents irregularities while seeking new employment, or the nurse who follows proper protocols despite colleagues cutting corners. Silent resistance preserves your capacity to fight another day. Psychological research reveals why this approach works. A Yale study on workplace ethics found that overt moralizers often get isolated, while those who pair principles with pragmatism influence culture long-term. Like Thrasea cultivating a network of Stoic senators, the so-called opposition under the emperor, effective change-makers build alliances before taking stands. A marketing executive resisting deceptive practices might first identify sympathetic colleagues, then present alternatives framed as business advantages. FTC fines could cost more than redesigning this campaign. That's principle with persistence playing the long game. Nero's opponents eventually won when the tyrant fell. But here's the brutal truth Stoics confront: sometimes you pay full price. Thrasea was eventually ordered to commit suicide, facing death with the same calm he showed in the Senate. His final hours, documented by Tacitus, became a masterclass in dignified resistance, dining with friends, discussing philosophy, then opening his veins while quoting Socrates. Yet his legacy outlived Nero's empire. Modern parallels aren't about literal death, but career suicide: the passed over promotion, the blacklisted consultant, the professor denied tenure for unpopular research. The Stoic preparation for these moments lies in premeditatio malorum, visualizing worst-case scenarios to strip them of terror. Imagine losing your job over refusing to falsify data. Now ask, could I survive financially for 6 months? Who would respect me more? What lower-paying but aligned work exists? This isn't pessimism, it's emotional vaccination. When a pharmaceutical employee I coached faced pressure to hide drug trial risks, she'd already mentally rehearsed resignation. Her calm exit letter citing patient safety later became evidence in a lawsuit that reformed company practices. Practical steps for toxic environments start with the 3 shields. First, document everything not aggressively, but as routine diligence. Second, build external validation through certifications, networks, or side projects that prove your worth beyond one employer. Third, identify non-negotiable lines beforehand. Will you mislead customers, ignore harassment, fudge numbers? Knowing your absolute limits prevents real-time rationalization. Ultimately, principle over popularity isn't about being the hero. It's about looking in the mirror decades later without flinching. Thrasea's last reported words weren't defiance or regret, but simple gratitude to a friend for comfort in his final hours. That's the real measure, not whether the world applauds your choices, but whether you can rest easy in the quiet moments with those who matter most. Because in the end, the opinions we chase fade faster than the respect we owe ourselves. And that's a truth no emperor can silence. Marcus Aurelius often climbed mental mountains before dawn, not to escape Rome's chaos, but to see it clearly. His view from above meditation wasn't about detachment from life. It was about gaining perspective within it. Picture this: you're standing on a cliff at night, overlooking a city sparkling with thousands of lights. From this height, arguments over parking spaces or office politics vanish. All that remains are patterns of light, movement, and connection. That's the core of the observer mindset, shrinking trivialities to their true size while clarifying what genuinely matters. Let's practice this together. Find a quiet space, a chair, a park bench, even your car during lunch. Close your eyes and take 3 deep breaths, imagining each exhale as a release of daily clutter. Now visualize lifting off the ground, floating upward until your neighborhood becomes a grid of rooftops. Notice how cars shrink to ants, people to dots. This isn't about diminishing humanity, it's about recognizing scale. That disagreement with your spouse, from here, it's one thread in a vast tapestry. The project deadline stressing you, a single flicker in the constellation of your career. Go higher. Now you see your entire city, then your country, then the earth itself, a blue marble hanging in blackness. The Stoics called this cosmic perspective. From this vantage point, ask yourself, which of my current worries would register here? Traffic jams and social media slights dissolve, while enduring values, kindness, creation, growth, glow brighter. Historical figures who obsessed over power, their empires now look like sandcastles at low tide. But the observer mindset isn't just passive watching, it's active reframing. As you hover above the planet, spot your tiny dot in the timeline of history. The average human life spans about 30,000 days. Against Earth's 4.5 billion years, your existence is briefer than a camera flash. This could feel depressing until you realize your struggles are equally fleeting. That awkward conversation, forgotten in weeks, the career setback. A blip, even grief, though deep, follows nature's rhythm. Seasons come and go, wounds scar over, dawn always follows night. Now the crucial pivot, zoom back in slowly, carrying this perspective with you. Watch as continents resolve into cities, neighborhoods, finally your own street. Open your eyes, the room hasn't changed, but your relationship to it has. That stack of unpaid bills now feels manageable, just tasks, not tidal waves. Your co-worker's snark seems less like a personal attack and more like their own unprocessed stress. This is the observer's gift, the ability to engage fully with life while holding the quiet knowledge that most storms pass, and those that don't, well, you'll meet them differently now. Practical integration starts small. Try micro-observations throughout your day. Stuck in line, glance at the ceiling and imagine viewing yourself from there. Suddenly, the weight loses its power. Fuming over an email, picture the sender as a 7-year-old clutching a lunchbox. Their harsh words often say more about their inner child than your actions. The goal isn't to dismiss real emotions, but to prevent small things from casting long shadows. Marcus wrote this exercise for wartime when death lurked outside his tent. Yet its power lies in mundane moments too, the parent soothing a toddler's tantrum, the artist doubting their work, the student facing exams. When you feel overwhelmed, remember, you're always one mental step back from the chaos, one breath away from clearer skies. The observer mindset doesn't remove you from life's theater. It lets you appreciate the play without mistaking your role for the entire script. And that shift, more than any tactic or quote, is where Stoic silence becomes true power. Legacy consciousness wasn't about carving your name into marble. It was about etching your values into the fabric of time. The Stoics lived with a unique double vision, fully present in the moment yet simultaneously aware of how their choices would ripple across centuries. Seneca captured this perfectly in a letter to his friend Lucilius, urging him to live as if your ancestors are watching over one shoulder and your descendants over the other. This wasn't metaphorical fluff, it was a psychological lever. When Marcus Aurelius penned his private journals never intended for publication, he wrote with the intensity of someone addressing future readers 2,000 years removed. And here we are, proving him right. Consider the Roman architect Vitruvius, who designed aqueducts not just to solve immediate thirst, but knowing they'd outlast empires. He built with stone that would weather centuries, joints precise enough to endure earthquakes, and gradients calculated to function long after his name was forgotten. That's legacy consciousness in action, the humility to serve those you'll never meet. Modern parallels emerge in Japan's Forests of the Future project, where citizens plant trees whose canopies won't fully mature for 300 years. Or the Norwegian seed vault preserving crop diversity for a climate-changed world its builders won't live to see. These aren't acts of vanity, they're Stoic contracts with the unborn. Your legacy letter exercise begins with a simple but radical question. What would my great-grandchild's grandchildren need from me today? Not money or fame, but wisdom. Not your resume, but your hard-won lessons compressed into actionable principles. Imagine writing to them in the year 2170. Describe the challenges you faced, not just external obstacles, but the inner battles that truly shaped you. Warn them of the traps that snared generations before, the hollow chase of status, the addiction to distraction, the fear of appearing foolish that stifles growth. Then share the keystone habits that helped you prevail, maybe your morning solitude ritual, or how you learned to distrust first impulses, or why you stopped measuring life in achievements and started counting it in moments of quiet integrity. The magic lies in specificity. Don't just advise, be resilient. Explain how you recovered when your business failed in 2023 and what the rubble taught you about true security. Skip platitudes like "follow your passion" in favor of gritty truths. Passion burns out, discipline builds, but discipline feels like boredom at first. Push through. Archaeologists note that ancient inscriptions carrying real cultural weight weren't grand pronouncements, but practical guidance how to purify water, resolve disputes, or calibrate scales fairly. Your letter should mirror that utility. Legacy consciousness also demands shadow work, confronting what you're not proud to pass forward. The Stoics called this humbling the future self. Maybe you're quick to anger or struggle with envy or have a lineage of broken family bonds. Acknowledge these patterns frankly in your letter, not as confessions but as cautionary markers. Our bloodline tends to "here's how I've fought it." This transforms generational curses into conscious choices for those who will inherit your name. The final test: seal the letter and store it with a meaningful object, a family recipe, a worn tool, or a book you've annotated. Better yet, bury it literally or digitally with instructions to open in decades. This physical act imprints the exercise with weight because legacy isn't left, it's loaned. The Stoics knew that true power lies not in controlling how you're remembered, but in offering something so timeless it transcends memory entirely. Your words may fade, but the lives they shape won't. And that's how silence echoes longest through generations you'll never meet, living by principles you planted like oaks, knowing they'd need shade long after you're gone. Think of these 25 traits as rungs on a ladder, not one leading straight to perfection, but each offering a handhold toward silent power. From unshakable composure to legacy consciousness, they're not abstract ideals. They're daily choices, like Marcus Aurelius scribbling reminders to himself in the dead of night, or Seneca refining his character through letters he never expected us to read. This isn't about grand transformations. It's about the quiet accumulation of small, stubborn acts of self-mastery. But here's the truth no philosophy video will admit: you don't need all 25 at once. Trying to swallow them whole is like drinking the ocean, so start with 3, just 3. Maybe it's disciplined speech where you pause 3 breaths before responding today. Maybe it's tactical patience where you let one petty argument pass without engagement. Or perhaps it's emotional alchemy where you take that simmering frustration from your commute and channel it into an overdue workout instead. The key isn't which ones you choose, it's that you choose. History's most formidable figures weren't born with these traits, they forged them in the fire of repetition. Scipio Africanus didn't wake up immune to insults, he practiced indifference until it became armor. Cotto the Younger didn't naturally prefer simple bread over feasts, he trained his appetites until deprivation felt like freedom. That's the invitation here, not to imitate them but to join the lineage, to look at your next irritation, your next temptation, your next moment of doubt and ask, what would the silent version of power do here? So we'll end with a question not rhetorical but pointed directly at you. Which trait will you master first? Not someday, not when life calms down, but today. Because silent power doesn't wait for the perfect moment, it creates it. And if this resonated, if you felt that flicker of recognition when we discussed enduring without complaint or listening without interrupting, then this is your sign. The Stoics didn't keep these secrets locked in scrolls. They left them lying around like tools, hoping someone would pick them up and build something sturdier than noise. Your next move, simple, pick 3, practice them ruthlessly, then come back. We're just scratching the surface. Hit subscribe, because next time we're diving into the forbidden Stoic tactics history's elites never wanted public. Until then, remember, the loudest voices echo briefly, the silent ones, they shape centuries.